I'm a firm believer that there are fundamental principles that you can guide your relationship by. I do not believe you should be playing Russian roulette with your life, especially when it comes to making such a important decision of who you're going to be with or partner up with in life, because it changes the trajectory of your life, either in elevating you or it could bring you down. So I don't believe that God would leave us just clueless about it and not give us some grounding principles to help us navigate it, especially since it is such a fundamental and integral part of life. No one's going to escape this world without dealing with the area of relationships. And so the first principle that I introduced was that when it comes to quote unquote that talk about the woman being the prize, because that has been said as well, or the man being the prize, that neither of them are the prize, and that the relationship is actually the win.
You'll be my forever friend. This love will never end. No, nothing can come between us.
You cannot truly experience authentic love until you learn how to love without expectation. That is the quote for tonight, folks. Do you agree with this quote? Do you think it's true? Do you think it's something that, you know what, if you did put it at the core of your relationship and put it as a mindset, that it would help your relationship, help you kind of grow with one another and stand firm as those challenges and changes of life happen? When I think of this topic of expectation, the reason why I think it's so important and why it continues to come up when we talk about relationship topics is because when you truly learn how to love without expectation, you throw yourself into trust. I remember I stopped going on live, but I didn't stop my coaching. I do have a coaching company called Interact Coaching. And then it turned into, I developed a group coaching kind of membership called Forever Friends Academy. So I've been doing a lot of my coaching offline on there before I started to come back. And I remember when I initially launched the group coaching that I had some participants that were on just to kind of see how it would be. And I was explaining to some of the participants that, one of, for some of you like Colin, he and Eddie, both of them know me from high school. So they know that my husband and I started out as friends. That's where Forever Friends comes from, is starting our friendship organically near the end of high school. And so whenever I usually tell people our story, they always are like, well, how do you still like each other? How do you still love each other? How does it seem like it's still fresh, basically? And I always usually answer the question by saying, I just delight in seeing his transformations. I delight in seeing all of the things that he goes through. And I remember I had one young lady who was a participant, and she was like, okay, I like what you said, but you just delight in all of his transformations. Like, what if he gets laid off? What if, and basically brought up a scenario that, okay, is there any delight in that, seeing him go through that? And what I explained to her was that if my husband gets laid off, that's a circumstance of life. That's not him, right, doing something to me. It's not me getting on him to fix this situation. It's always going to be, whenever those situations come up, it's always going to be a test if I trust God, not necessarily my husband, right? If I trust God will bring me out of whatever situation has come my way first before I put that on him. And I said, I think because I think that way, it goes that way first for me. It goes in that direction first rather than pointing at him to fix the situation. That allows me to not put a whole bunch of expectations or stipulations or try to calculate how we are going to navigate or transition through this uncertain situation. And so I think when it comes to expectations, that's why it's important, because the trust is what allows you to navigate uncertain, right, transitions in life or uncertain situations that come up. And if we know anything about this life, is that it's very uncertain. even though we have our daily rhythms and we have our routines, uncertainty comes at any moment. Life could throw us a curveball, and then we'll have to learn how to be flexible and adjust. And without having adaptability, without having an undergirding of trust, and knowing that you're going to be okay, and that no matter what comes both of your way, that you guys will come out stronger. Without that, it's very hard. You're gonna feel beat up, and then that pressure, a lot of times many of us buckle under that pressure, and then the pressure makes us come against each other and forget that we're supposed to be a team going through this situation. So that's why I think this conversation is so important. And so for anyone who's watching who doesn't know or is not familiar with the story or what occurred, Simone Biles' husband, I believe his name is Jonathan Owens. I hope I'm not mispronouncing it. I apologize if I am. But nonetheless, he is a football player, and he went on a popular podcast. And of course, they were asking him about his process and how he got to where he is. And then one of the hosts just kind of went straight to ask him a personal question. And he basically just asked him, how did you pull Simone Biles? How did you get her? Because, anyone who knows, I mean, she's very widely and well known. She's amazing gymnast. And so I guess he was saying because she is such a phenomenal athlete and a woman of that type of status, he wanted to know the story. So nonetheless, to make the long story short, in his explaining of the story, he basically said that she pursued him and that he was the catch. And that, he always believes that men are the catch. And so it threw, as far as what I'm seeing or hearing, is it threw the internet into a frenzy, because I guess many people felt like, okay, well, no, he's definitely not, because of her accolades, because of what, who she is and what she's done, et cetera, et cetera. So I thought it would be great to talk about it, because when I first came back on doing my lives and talking with you guys, my very first principle that I introduced, because I always tell anyone who comes to my podcast or inquires about doing coaching with me, is that I'm a firm believer that there are fundamental principles that you can guide your relationship by. I do not believe you should be playing Russian roulette with your life, especially when it comes to making such a important decision of who you're going to be with or partner up with in life, because it changes the trajectory of your life, either in elevating you or it could bring you down. So I don't believe that God would leave us just clueless about it and not give us some grounding principles to help us navigate it, especially since it is such a fundamental and integral part of life. No one's going to escape this world without dealing with the area of relationships. And so the first principle that I introduced was that when it comes to quote unquote that talk about the woman being the prize, because that has been said as well, or the man being the prize, that neither of them are the prize, and that the relationship is actually the win. So that's one of the principles that I'll usually tell, if I have a couple and they're starting coaching with me and their clients, that's one of the first things that we kind of talk about and we lay down, is that, both of you are winners, I should say, right? Like if we're on the dating plane and we're trying to navigate developing friendships and seeing who, right, stands out to us, who, when we partner with them or we're engaging with them, is just a natural type of organic flow. And they bring out the best in you when you're trying to determine that. We're all in the running, right? We're all kind of like surveying the grounds. And once you have been able to find that person that you feel like they are, the best person to be by your side through all of the experiences that you will have in life, it is most definitely because you know that you're greater with them than without them. And the totality of the nature of both of your characters creates something that is completely new and something that is a totally different entity than what you, in your own self, no matter how valuable you were, you are now have greater value with the combination of you two. And I think, when I think I watched most of it. I didn't watch his interview in its entirety. So let me say that. But I did watch from the beginning all the way up until when they were talking about his wife and her response and his response. And what I will say is that one thing that I appreciate is that it seemed, in the way that he answered, that he was being honest. I don't know about the part of him saying he didn't know who she was. The host kind of looked at him like, gave him a little side eye, like, you didn't know who Simone Biles was. So I'm not going to comment on that part, but I do appreciate that if that's how he feels, that he actually stated it and he said it, right? And that he didn't necessarily just try to gloss it over and say what he thought was politically correct. If that's where he is and that's the honest answer he gave, then I think that's good. And that at least is a starting point and a place for them to evolve from. Because sometimes when you are, because they are newlyweds, right? And anybody, I know Eddie is married. Hey, Corey, I didn't even see you coming here. Hey, Corey, how are you? Anybody who is married or has gone into a relationship, a long-term relationship, we know the process is, it's like a purging of your own selfishness. You know what I mean? It's a purging of the independent, kind of mentality into an interdependent, collective type of thought, daily thought process where you are no longer just thinking about yourself, right? And that you have others more immediately to think of, And by the way, when we're single and we're making decisions, you impact people. But I think when you are in relationship situations such as marriage, which is a covenant type of commitment, that person is constantly there and in your face in a mirror. It's you have to think about it often. You have to think about it all the time of how your decisions will affect that person. And so I think when they both sit down and kind of look at that video, and he, both of them really, because I think also as the interview evolved and he was saying what he was saying, and she was kind of trying to clarify, in the story what he was saying and how they both matched. And she was just the first to kind of reach out to him. And at the end, she was like saying that, at some point down the line, people will start to say that instead of Simone Biles' husband, they'll say, oh, that's Jonathan, and I hope that's his last name, Owens' wife. I mean, not wife. Yeah, Jonathan Owens' wife, saying that position as far as how the public view them will now change. And I thought that's interesting that she said that, because it almost seemed like she wanted her husband to have the position that he plays in her life, and for that position to be respected and honored by the public, even though she has the status that she has. And I just thought it was a really interesting process to see play out, right? Because we all have our moments and our things that we go through, but when you're a celebrity, you go through it in public, and everybody picks it apart, and you have to kind of hold your strength in it all. And so, but you can see that she was kind of just compensating for it, because I think of people who, phenomenal women who have, made their name in the public because of the art or the talent that they have or the skill. And those women, I don't think it ever turns into whoever they're married to, that then now they are called that person's, wife. Like, for instance, Whitney Houston, or someone like a Beyonce, or Michelle Obama, for that fact. I think, yeah, when you meet someone, they can introduce them as that person's wife or husband, but they've made, because of what they have done or how they've stamped who they are and what they do in people's minds, they're known as that. But that doesn't take away from the marriage at all. But I think as, they evolve, I think when you're telling a story, and if you are a person who knows that whoever they have been able to find and be able to experience authentic love with, they're most definitely considering that person a gift. They're considering that person who God has brought into their life as someone who they feel like is irreplaceable, and brings out something inside of them that when they surveyed other people, didn't. And I think that's what was missing in the way that he expressed it. Now, not in the evidence of his action, right, is that he married her. So that's solid in that. But I think we go into relationships and we go into marriage, and sometimes we go into it having to iron out our immaturities and having to come to greater understanding. That's what the marriage is there for. And I think when people were picking apart what he said, and of course it's a little bit of the culture today, you say one thing and everybody's on, and it's like, oh, they should get divorced, or they'll be headed towards divorce and things like that. And it's like, no, and not necessarily. Hopefully they have good people in their corner who can sit them down and maybe have talks with them, and people that they can glean from who have already been married for some time, that can help them kind of get to that understanding that the relationship is the win, and that the relationship is the prize at the end and in the process. So, and I don't think that it means that their relationship has to be over, but definitely the way that they both express certain things in that interview, showed that there are some things that, of course, they're still going to be working on. So what do you guys think? You don't, I always say no one has to, you don't have to agree with me. I would love to hear your thoughts on what do you think? Do you agree with what he said? Do you think that the men are the prize right now? I understand, at least I believe I understand from the positioning, the position that he took. If it's the fact that, women, right, outnumber men, and, the pursuit of being able to find, just because of the imbalance of the number, and maybe because of the way culture is shifting right now, why he believes that. So I get that. But at the end of the day, in if we're going to strip it down to bare truth and bare principle, both of those people, were in a process, and really the process that they're going through is really the prize, right? The process of entering into a relationship, being able to get to a certain point that you're committing to each other on so many different levels, emotionally, spiritually, physically, even for those who go through the process of legally making it official on all, right, on all angles, to be able to go through that process, and all of the things that you will find out about yourself through that process, and hopefully all the gems that you'll extract that'll make you greater, is really what the catch is really what the prize is, So if we can kind of keep that at the center, then then the relationship grows. And I think when someone asks a question in that way, even if it was the person who did the first step or made the first move, because of what that relationship has afforded that person to become or is allowing them to go through the process of their becoming, it's nothing but gratefulness and gratitude and honor for that, right? That person who God presented, who could be a kind of like a package to be the facilitator of how you can kind of go through that growth process. Most people like prizes, most people like rewards. And for those of us who are courageous enough and brave enough to kind of pursue our life passions and purpose and venture out into, endeavors in life, we usually go after it wanting to be at the top of our game or wanting to elevate to the most optimal level, to be the winner, basically. And when you get to that point, I was just thinking, if you are the person who's competing in a certain thing and when you win, are you the prize or is the prize what you have acquired, right? And I think if you speak to any athlete or any person who maybe be a musician who gets an award like a Grammy or a trophy, it's great when you get that reward at the end, but that person knows that they put in so much work and so many things that they had to develop through the process that they had to go through, that that trophy could not just reflect all of what they put into their time, their investment of energy to get out. And so I was just thinking about that in the context of this discussion, that it can never be true that just either the man or the woman is the prize in it, because the process, right, is what and what we how we grow and how we transform through that process is the greatest prize for the both of us. Now, are they both winners? Yeah. If they were able to find each other, if they were able to drop their own selfishness and are able to let go of their expectations, to let love have the strongest voice, and to be people who can say, you know what, I went through this life, or I'm going through this life, and guess what? I'm able to experience love. I'm able to experience authentic love. Then that is a gift. Absolutely. That is the true, real gift. That's the true catch.